So Paul Brandus is an award-winning journalist and a contributing columnist for publications such as Market Watch, The Guardian, and The Week. He spent many years in Russia covering the news for NBC, correct? Yes, NBC. He has literally been all over the world, and when we asked him yesterday if he'd ever been to North Korea, he said, well, yes, technically. So he is also an independent member of the White House Press Corps. Beginning in 2009, and without the platform of a major network or newspaper, he single-handedly created and built the West Wing reports into an important news source. He currently has over 200,000 Twitter followers, which is in fact the most Twitter followers of any member of the White House Press Corps. One of my favorite parts of West Wing reports is how the news is put into a historical context. So when somebody else declares this is the absolute worst thing that's ever happened, he says, well, actually. He has been described as, what's that?
It's always worse.
It's always worse, yeah. He has been described as one of the most influential journalists in the White House Press Corps by the Knight Foundation's Digital Media Center. And The Atlantic declared him as one of Washington insiders you should absolutely follow on Twitter. He's also the author of the forthcoming book, Under This Roof, a history of the presidency in 21 White House rooms. With this combination of entrepreneurship, strategy, global knowledge, and sense of history, he truly is a perfect speaker for us at Washington and Lee University. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased to introduce to you Paul Brandus. I'm supposed to remind you to put this on.
What? Oh.
I'm supposed to remind you to put that on your lapel or something.
Usually these things are just one microphone here, so I'm kind of a
We like to do things twice. We like
double-barreled microphone here today. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm really way down here. Well, thank you very much. It's really, I appreciate that, Amanda. And before I start here, I just wanted to say this is my first trip to Lexington and my first trip to WNL, and I really have to say this is one of the most beautiful college campuses I've ever seen. I've really been so impressed with how polite people are, the southern civility. I mean, I'm an old sort of New York guy, so to come down here and people call me sir, I say, sir, that's sort of what they call my dad, so my name is Paul. So I really appreciate the hospitality and the welcome, and in particular, I just wanted to single out two people who've been so helpful in bringing me down here. Amanda, of course, my Twitter buddy, and Rachel Beanland here, who's been so helpful. So to both of you, thank you very much. So we got a lot of ground to cover here tonight, and we're going to move kind of quickly. Now, so many things have changed over the past couple of years. We're okay on the screen. I backed it up. Technology has changed. The way we consume information has changed. The way we distribute it has changed. Everything has changed, so it's impacted not just the media, but our political system as well, and then it's affected us in ways that perhaps I'm not so positive about. I'll save that for last. So anyway, with all that in mind, we're going to call this little talk tonight News, Business, and Politics, how they're changing each other, and how they're changing us. And I'm going to start by actually talking real briefly about why I do what I do and how I do it, and it'll help explain some of the other points that I'm going to make a little bit later on. So I'm going to actually start by making a couple of points here. The first point, I'm going to make about 5 or 6 points tonight here, and we're going to go kind of quickly. The first point here is names are not as important as you think. And what I mean by that, I'll explain that by actually asking you a question. Now, I've done these kind of talks all the time, and I'm always asking this question. Nobody has gotten the answer to this question, but I'm thinking you guys are smart. You're plugged in. If anybody knows the answer to this question, it's going to be you guys, okay? Here's the question. Tell me the names of the White House correspondents at the big 5 television networks 10 years ago. ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, 10 years ago. Now, a lot of you guys were 10 years old 10 years ago, so I'll give you some. 10 years ago, can anybody get it? Kevin's scratching his head. It's tough, isn't it? How about 5 years ago? Even one name from 5 years ago? Can anybody name them? No? How about 2 or 3 years ago? Again, these are the big network TV White House guys. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, can anybody name even one of them? It's hard to do, right? So that brings me to the first point here. The names are not as important as you think. And as we've just demonstrated, the names come and go. They're instantly forgotten about. And again, we're talking network television at the White House. It's the most visible platform in all of American journalism. Nobody can remember who the names are. It's the brand that endures. We don't know who the CBS White House person is. It's Major Garrett. We don't know who the Fox News White House person is. It's N. Henry. But if you can't name them, at least you know that their brands are there. The brands will endure and the brands will always be there. And then over the past couple of years, thanks to technology and the changing marketplace, new brands have emerged as well. BuzzFeed, for example, very interesting new brand. They actually have a White House guy too, and I'm thinking if you don't know who the Fox person is, you probably don't know who the BuzzFeed person is too. So that's the point. The names simply don't count. So what I did when I came back to Washington, I worked in Europe for a long time, and then New York for NBC and different things, and then financial industry. When I left all that, came back down to Washington, I decided, well, I'm going to start my own media company at the White House, and I decided, based on that point that I just made about how the names don't count, I figured, well, nobody knows my name. Nobody cares other than my wife and my family. My name is Paul. That doesn't do anything for me. So I decided that I would focus on building a brand name instead. So it's called West Wing Reports. Now, you don't see my name anywhere here at all for the reasons that I just explained. So brands have huge advantages, in my judgment at least, that individual names don't. Brands add value. Brands can be licensed. Brands can be flipped. In other words, I can sell my company. So enduring market power that you don't necessarily have with an individual. There are exceptions, people like Charlie Rose who have built brands based on their name. There are exceptions, but by and large, I think the brand is so much more important than the person. So the brand name first and any individual name second, and here are a couple of examples. Even the savviest media companies in all the country understand this. Big capital letters, NBC Nightly News, smaller letters, Brian Williams. Studio B, the Fox show that comes on at 3 o'clock Eastern, small letters, Shepard Smith. Meet the Press, big screaming letters, small letters, Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd wasn't even NBC's first choice to have that show, so I'm not sure how long he'll be around, maybe neither are they, so small letters for Chuck. So that's the point. Brand name comes first, and the individual name, if any, comes second. Again, as I mentioned, Charlie Rose is one of the exceptions. So just to sum up, point one, names come and go, but the brands last forever. At least that's the way I saw it. So that's my brand. Now, point two is nobody's watching, or at least a lot fewer than you think. Now, this is a commentary on television. Fewer people are watching than you think. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to talk about first about the big three. I shouldn't even call them big. I'll talk about the three cable news channels, and we know what they are. There's Fox, there's CNN, and there's MSNBC. Now, how can anybody just take a guess? How many people do you think actually watch these channels? Anybody want to venture? 300 million people in this country. How many people watch? Anybody want to venture a guess? Anybody? How many? 2 million.
2 million combined.
2 million combined, okay. That's a pretty good guess. Let's see. In prime time, these are prime time numbers now, so of course the daytime figures are even less. CNN these are numbers for about the first 9 months of the year. CNN, 500,000. MSNBC, 600,000. Fox News, obviously doing much better than both of those combined, 1.75 million. So you win the prize, Kevin. So if you add all these numbers up, though, 500,600,000, 1.75 million. What it really means is that in a country of 310 million people, you've got about 1% of the country watching cable news. 99% of the country has better things to do than watch cable news. It's absolutely remarkable, I think. And yet, despite that, there's this, they seem to have this outsized influence. Even the next day you hear people talking about things they saw on Fox or some clip that's making the internet about something inflammatory or dramatic or entertaining or something like that. And the reason for that is even though so few people watch these cable channels, they've really spawned sort of a whole cottage industry of websites that have sprung up that they get kids and they watch these cable shows and they write articles, again, based on dramatic, exciting, inflammatory things, and they put them on their site. Here's a handful of them: Fishbowl, New York, Fishbowl, DC, Daily Caller, Media Item, and you know who they are. And that's what they do. So even though nobody watches cable news, thanks to sites like this that kind of, go along for the ride, it has this effect of amplifying these small cable voices into something that they're not. They make them larger than they are. Does that make sense? So they have this amplification effect that exaggerates the importance relative to the audience that they have. So I think that's a really interesting development. One platform kind of feeds the other. Now let's talk about moving from cable news to the big three, and again, I shouldn't use the word big when describing these, the three main network evening newscasts. Again, ABC, CBS, NBC. Look at these numbers here. Back in 1980, they had an audience, again, collectively each night, 52 million people, and a percentage of the population then, it was about just under a quarter of the population. I mean, these nightly shows were enormously important, enormously influential. Everybody wanted to be on them. Fast forward to 2010, they lost about 60% of their audience, down to about 22 million. It's actually inched up a little bit the past 6 months or so, but I think that's probably an outlier. About 22 million now, but just because the population has grown so much, their share of the population is really down to about 7%. So we have about 1% of the country, in prime time at least, watching cable news. You have about 1 person in 12 watching these three evening news shows. So in a way, these three shows, even though they continue to make millions of dollars for their networks, they continue to fade away. So that is another big development. So when I say that nobody's watching, the main point here, cable news, really the audience is much smaller than people think. And even on these big nightly network newscasts, those numbers have really faded as well. So the question is, if you have there's one other, before we move on, there's one other point. You can even take these numbers, slice them up demographically by age. Now, the median age in the United States is 37 years old. I think that's a Census Department figure, about 37. Look at these average viewer ages for the three evening news shows: 53. For CNN, 63 years old, MS 66. Fox News is literally the granddaddy of them. 69 years old is the average viewer for Fox News. And if you don't believe me, look at the kind of commercials that they run. It's things like, Metamucil and reverse mortgages and products that generally appeal to that older crowd. You're not going to see a lot of beer commercials or hot cars on. You might see cars on Fox News, I guess, but that's the point. So the ages, the audience is shrinking. It's also the wrong demographic as well. They're well beyond what advertisers want. The demo, the 25 to 54-year-olds that advertisers really covet. So that's another big development as too. So the question is, if you have these audiences disappearing on television, well, where are they all going? Where are they all going? And I think we know the answer here. Everybody here is on their laptop. They're all going to what I call the big enchilada, which is social media. And I can't decide if that looks tasty or disgusting. I'm not quite sure, but it's the big enchilada. That is social media. And some more numbers here. Adults using social media now. A decade ago, keep in mind 7% watching these network evening news shows now. A decade ago, about 8% using social media. Again, this is before anybody had heard of Twitter or Facebook or anything. Fast forward a decade, look at it now. 3 out of 4 adults are now engaged with social media. So it has completely exploded as television has declined. So you have these crossing trend lines that have really tipped the scales, I think, in some really interesting ways. And there's also more on the generational divide. Among the 18 to 29 group, that's a lot of you in the room tonight, 9 out of 10 are, what's the fine print here say? Percentage of population engaged with either platform. 9 out of 10 engaged with social media. Only about 1 out of 10 are engaged with these 3 evening news programs. And among seniors, 65 and older, even most of them are more engaged with social media than the evening news. And let's define social media here. I know there are a lot of platforms, but just for purposes of this discussion, let's call them Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I know there are others, but let's just keep it to those 3. So that's the generational divide. Now, another interesting question is, I think this is a really interesting debate, and we're going to use my former White House colleague, Jake Tapper, who left ABC about 2 years ago to go to CNN, and he has a show on every day at 4 o'clock Eastern Time called The Lead. It's a really well-produced show. But here's the interesting point. Jake gets on CNN about 300,000 people a day, which at 4 o'clock is not a bad number in my judgment. So 300,000 people on CNN, but on his Twitter account, he actually has more Twitter followers than CNN viewers, 350,000. Now, people might say, well, he has a lot of Twitter followers because he's on TV and that draws them to Twitter. Well, I have 200,000 Twitter followers and I'm not on TV as often as he is. So the point is this: which audience is better? Is it CNN or is it Twitter? Now, I think most people quite honestly would say, well, CNN is more prestigious. I'd probably rather be on CNN, but nevertheless, it's the smaller number. So it's a really interesting question. And I think as time goes forward, I think that debate, at some point, there's going to be a tipping point where people will say, well, I think I'd rather have a big Twitter audience than be on CNN where so few people are watching. I'm not quite sure we're at that point in people's minds yet, but again, these trend lines that I've explained where people are disappearing from TV and moving to this big enchilada, big taco, somebody else called it, of social media, I think that's the big debate going into the future here. So what do you think? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Where would you rather be? Twitter has the bigger number. So Jake wouldn't give me his opinion when I asked him that. He didn't want to. TV is even less important if you have not 300,000 viewers, but if you have a huge number of Twitter followers, like these 2 individuals in one brand. Barack Obama, no surprise, 50 million Twitter followers, 50 million. Lady Gaga, 43 million Twitter followers. JetBlue, 2 million Twitter followers. They're a sponsor of mine. I threw them in, but they're really interesting, brand here. So here's the question. If you are Barack Obama and you have 50 million Twitter followers, but only a couple 100,000 people watch CNN, why would you bother giving an interview to CNN and subjecting yourself to questions that you don't know in advance, that you can't control, when you can simply control your own environment, put out a message of your own choosing on a far bigger network and not have it challenged by anybody. That's why politicians these days are moving more and more to social media, moving away a little bit off the television platform. Why? Because their networks are bigger and because they can control their message in a way that simply isn't possible on television. I put Lady Gaga in here for kind of a different reason. She's a brand. We were talking about the importance of brands before. Lady Gaga is a brand who has 43 million Twitter followers, and the question for her is, if Barack Obama doesn't need the media as much as he used to, and if Lady Gaga, who has her own distribution network of 43 million followers, why does she need, say, a record company to promote and distribute her product? She doesn't. She can simply go on to Twitter or her Facebook account, say, here's my latest album, click on this link, $19.99, here's the album, and she keeps all the money. And what that means is whether it's the news media or whether it's a record company or what other industry you choose to pick, the point here is that the middleman is going away. That's the third point here. In this transaction environment, whether it's the media, whether it's record companies or any kind of industry that you can think of, the middleman is really going away. So if you're in the advertising business, if you're in the marketing business, I think there are profound implications for you when you have a client who says, you know what, I've got a giant network, I don't need you as much as I would have 10 years ago. How are you going to respond to that? And that's a challenge that I think is only going to get bigger for people, again, who have big networks. There aren't a lot of people who have Lady Gaga or Barack Obama kind of numbers, but I think you see the point here that over time, people are becoming more of their own brands, and they can go out and market their own products by themselves. So the middleman is going away. That's the third point here. And what this means also is because there are so many platforms now, there is still 1 million cable channels, radio has been disrupted, newspapers are in big trouble, the newspaper industry is now in its third decade of trying to make this really rocky transition to the digital age. A lot of newspapers, as you know, have gone under. The book publishing industry has also been turned upside down. All of this means in the aggregate is that the audience has been scattered to the wind. Think about that. Remember we just talked about a few minutes ago how the big 3 evening newscasts, they had a huge chunk of the audience. They've all gone away. So the audience is now scattered to the winds. So if you are a marketer, if you're a PR person, and I've sat in on a couple of these classes, if you're a marketer, if you're a PR person, if you're an ad guy, how do you reach your audience when they've been completely scattered to the wind? What do you do? So I think it's more challenging than ever. It's not like the old days, if you watch that show Mad Men, where you go out to lunch and have 3 martinis and you sign the deal. It's a little more complicated than that these days, simply because the audience is all over the map. And it's not just because they're in different places, but they're in different places by age group and by geographic region and by educational achievement and on and on. It's more scattered than ever. So for politicians trying to win national elections, for people trying to market products or ideas or services, harder than ever to cut through this clutter and reach the people that you're trying to reach. That is another huge change as well. And that brings us to point 4 here, which is it's all granular. So marketing these days, it's more micro than ever. And fortunately, there is one advantage for marketers and for ad people today that didn't exist in the Mad Men days, and that is they have more data at their disposal than ever before. It's literally at their fingertips. The analytics are much better, so they can instantly say, if you wanted to, I don't know what the zip code is down here, but you could say in zip code, Lexington, I want to know how many people make $75,000 a year, have a graduate degree, and drive a BMW and live in a house worth more than, you can slice it and dice it any way you want. You can come up with that data in a couple of minutes. So it's all very granular. Now let's talk about that quickly from a political standpoint, in the 2012 campaign, we saw an awful lot of that where the Democrats were much better than the Republicans at using data and analyzing it and getting down to this granular level, also known as grassroots, I suppose, and reaching the people that they needed to reach and getting them out to the polls. One of the more recent examples was, if you remember about a year ago, when Obamacare rolled out, it was in trouble, they had the bad website and all of that. But the real scare for the White House was not the website. The real scare for the White House was, are we going to get enough young people to enroll and pay into this system? They were really desperate to get enough young people to enroll. So what they did, somebody came into the White House communication shop and said, there's this program on Funny or Die called Between Two Ferns. Anybody here watch that a year ago by chance? Raise your hands. Well, several, wow. So about a third of the room watched it, and it was just, remarkable. And when in the press room, it was really interesting. This is sort of a generational divide kind of anecdote. The older people in the press room, who, like one guy kind of started out when Calvin Coolidge was there, he said, well, I don't understand this. I've never heard of it. It doesn't make sense to me. Other people said, it's degrading for the President of the United States to do something like this. It's demeaning for the office of the presidency for him to do something like that. I think that's kind of a valid point, but they were desperate to get folks to sign up. So this is what he did, and despite all the laughing and people talking about how degrading it was, it actually got about 12 million uniques. Some in this room, apparently. They met their numbers. In fact, they exceeded them, all because of little things like this. So they've learned to get really granular about reaching their audience. And to the broader point, if you were blown away by how they used data and how they used analytics in 2012, you haven't seen anything yet, because 2016, they're going to rewrite the book yet again. And what I think we saw in the midterms that just ended, I think my sense is the Republicans, they learned in a hurry how to use data a lot better. They brought in some people from Facebook and this and that. So they've learned to get better data, to analyze it better. So I think in 2016, whoever the Republicans put up to run against Hillary, I suppose, I think the playing field is going to be much more level. So marketing, whether it's politics or anything else, more granular than ever before. It's difficult, but the data at our disposal is also greater than ever before, too. So that makes it easier. The last 2 points here, we're down to 2 points. And I think these two things, I think, really bother me more than anything else here. And I worry deeply about these 2 points. The first one is institutional trust is vanishing in this country. And I think you know what I mean by that. We don't trust anybody anymore. We don't trust our politicians. We don't trust the media, this lamestream media. And I'm in the media, and I understand completely, and I'm skeptical myself every day about things that I see and I read. So I understand completely. So institutional trust is vanishing. How much? Look at these numbers. What does that say at the bottom? Who did that poll? I can't read it. Is it, yeah, it's a Gallup poll. 29% of us have confidence in the presidency, 22% in newspapers, news on the internet. That's kind of a vague category, but 19% had television news, 18% confidence level, and no surprise, confidence levels in Congress, 7%. We don't trust the media, and we don't trust our politicians. So this institutional trust is really just disappearing rapidly. We don't trust anybody anymore. So the question is, well, who do we trust now? You don't trust the media, you don't trust what you see on television or read in the paper, so who do you trust? And we saw this again in 2012. We're going to see it more in 2016. Who we trust are people we know. Where they think the media is, they think we're liars, they think we're spinning things, they think we have an agenda. Again, I understand. So the question is, I forgot about that slide. So who do we trust? We trust our friends, we trust our family. That's who we trust. We don't trust anybody else. And what's important about this is if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram, you get something from your brother or your mother or your roommate or somebody you know and like and respect, you're probably going to read it. You might open it and look at the video. Look at this stupid thing that Hillary did or Rand Paul did or whoever it is. You're probably going to read it and you're probably going to look at it. And you might forward it, in fact, onto your own friends and family. And again, it has this, we engage in the amplification effect I described earlier as well. We forward things on to others. So we trust friends and family. So for 2016, and not just for politics in 2016, but again for marketers and ad people and stuff, here's what's going to happen. Campaigns, whether they're political or otherwise, are increasingly going to be driven by things like Facebook shares, by YouTube. Barack Obama's YouTube account, hundreds of millions of views, hundreds of millions, unfiltered, unedited by network television, hundreds of millions, retweets on Twitter, things like that. So when you forward things on to your friends and your family, well, congratulations, you're sort of an unpaid volunteer for the campaign because you're helping to spread their message for free and you're not getting anything out of it. So those are going to be huge drivers in 2016. So a key to campaigns going forward is you want your good stuff to go viral online. It's much more important than having a 30-second soundbite on CNN with a small number. If you can get something viral online of your good stuff, I mean, that is just worth a fortune. At the same time, you want to get whatever your opponent's bad stuff is, you want to get that to go viral as well. And again, it's free delivery because you are sending it on to your network all by yourself, and that saves campaigns advertising money, theoretically. They don't have to hire as many people because guess what? You're doing the work for them and you're spreading the message. So we saw a ton of this in 2012. It's only going to get bigger in 2016. So just as, see, the 1960 campaign where John F. Kennedy won the first debate with Richard Nixon. Nixon won on the radio, but if you're watching on television, Kennedy won that debate. So just as television in 1960 helped Kennedy, Clinton, and the internet during the 1990s, and one part of the internet, social media, I think could be the dominant force in 2016, just as television was in 1960, and just as the internet was in, I suppose, 96 for Clinton. So I think that is one of the biggest things here. So the decimation of institutional trust and the shift in the distribution of content to friends and family, I think that is really a major force. The last point here is, again, this is something that bothers me a great deal too. I call this a blinder mentality, no explanation needed with Mr. Ed here. And I guess what I mean by that is things like Twitter and Facebook are really what you make of them. They're these incredible platforms with this incredible potential to bring people together and to share views and exchange ideas and learn from each other. But what do a lot of people do instead of doing that? What a lot of people do is they engage in sort of this tribal instinct where they associate only with their own. In other words, liberals on Twitter tend to follow only people who generally think like themselves. Conservatives do the same thing, and they're quick to block others who think differently. So rather than engaging, communicating with, possibly learning from each other, instead they put these blinders on, associate only with their own. So despite this vast potential that things like Twitter and Facebook has, it's what you make of it. And a lot of people choose not to make that most out of it. People And when people do that, by the way, when you block people simply because they have a point of view that may be different from yours, if you block them because of that, to me that says you are an insecure person, and you're so insecure you're unwilling to even hear the point of view from someone who disagrees with you on an issue. To me, that's a very corrosive trend that I worry about. We can't even listen or communicate to people who have views different than ours. I think that's a really big deal. We only want to listen to people who tell us what we want to hear, who confirm our pre-existing views. I think the phrase for this is confirmation bias. We want people to confirm our pre-existing biases. And if you have something different to say, it's like, goodbye. I'm going to unfollow you. I'm going to block you, whatever it is. So I really worry about that as well. And in conjunction with that, there was another Gallup poll. I don't think I have a slide for this, but a couple of months ago, it said, for example, that 3/5 of Americans don't even know which party controls Congress. Other examples like that, on and on and on. So despite this blizzard of information at our fingertips, all these channels, all these networks, all these platforms, websites, social media, a lot of us simply don't know key facts and don't know how things work or who's in charge. So the question that I have here, I hope this picture isn't too, oh, well, there's another point, by the way. The other thing about social media, I'll get to the other point in a minute, is because of social media, it spawns ignorance in a way that I just described because we don't want to learn from others. And yet what it also spurs is the quick ability for people to demonize the other side. Now, I remember back in the last few years of the Bush administration, Republicans were outraged when Democrats and liberals would portray Bush as Hitler here, as you see on the left. Well, now the shoe's on the other foot, and you have conservatives portraying Barack Obama in the same way. And I think when you start comparing American presidents to Adolf Hitler, really, I mean, to me, that just shows the ignorance that we have in this country. We seem to tolerate it, the tendency to just instantly demonize the other side rather than talk to them. So when I talk about the corrosive effect that these things have on our culture, this is a good example of it. So this kind of thing really bothers me as well. And I see this every single day, and I worry deeply about that. So the level of ignorance that is out there with things like this, where people don't want to learn, they don't want to talk to other people who are different from them, I wonder how well informed is our electorate. I hope that's not too bad of a picture for you, but hey, a picture, I think that says it all. But I really do worry about the last 2 points in particular, the loss of institutional trust and this blinder mentality that we have. I think they're both really dangerous trends, and I sure wish I knew sort of how you could reverse these trends. I think they're really dangerous. They have this corrosive effect that is anything but healthy. So I'm going to end actually on a more positive note with a quote from, I guess, one of our favorite presidents, Abraham Lincoln, who actually had a very different point of view. And Lincoln said, listen to this quote, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." I don't like that man. I must get to know him better. People don't do that these days. They demonize you. They block you. They don't want to have anything to do with you. So on that point, I'll end and say thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to talk.
Questions? Do you want the mic?
No.
No, you don't have to. Okay.
That mic is going to pick up the room.
All right, good.
Hope those pictures weren't too much there, by the way. Nothing makes a point like a good picture. So I'm happy to take any questions or. Hi.
I guess recently what I've been hearing about social media, people are turning to that to get their news, but a lot of people still think that traditional media sources such as newspapers and television will be used to provide context and professional perspective. What do you think about that?
I think that's probably true, but the one slide that I had about how sort of even the trust in those is declining, I would hope so, because things like Twitter, how much context and perspective can you get in 140 characters? So I think what you're talking about are sort of long reads, longer articles that people can read to get more information. I hope that's right, because I think that's really needed. Whether it's on what we call newspapers or some other venue, I hope something like that continues to exist. Yeah. 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 Is that it? Anybody? Hi.
What made you want to start the West Forum?
Well, I had been, I worked for big television networks for a long time, and then in financial services industry. And when I moved back down to Washington, I decided that I didn't want to work for anybody else. Again, I only wanted to work for myself, and technology had changed to the point where I thought it was possible and I could make a go of it. And so I did. I got my Secret Service pass, and I started going into the White House and picking up clients and tweeting, and I'm still standing. So, yeah. Hi.
Yeah, you spoke at length about kind of how social media is this awesome tool for the campaigning process for the politicians. I was wondering if you kind of see it as also being a tool to assist in the governing itself, if it's like kind of becoming something to kind of maybe make the process a little more effective for the politicians.
Well, it could be. I mean, there's such high levels of distrust in our government. I mean, the government is so big and complex, and people are mystified by it. I mean, try calling, think of the DMV times 20. It's just hard to deal with and get the information that you need. If there was some way to distill all this complexity somehow and put it on to kind of short form that could help people, boy, that would be great. But they haven't. They're not really doing that. I mean, all these government agencies and bureaucracies, they have their own Twitter accounts, but they don't really do what you're talking about, which certainly sounds like a great idea. Hi.
Is there evidence of mischief making by political organizations, not communicating via social media to their followers, but trying to put out disinformation to the other side?
Well, that happened. That's been going on for years. I mean, way before that probably. But that probably goes back to 1800, when people put out slanderous things about their opponent and mudslinging and all of that. I think that still goes on. It should probably move to a different venue. So yeah, absolutely. In fact, you watch these TV ads that you still see. I watch these TV ads for these candidates. I don't know whether they're true or not. Some people try and fact check ads, but if you're on the road and you're in, say, Kentucky, and you're watching an ad, I don't know whether it's true or not. Half the stuff is slanted, or they take a sound bite out of context, or a line from an editorial, and they put it in big letters and are taking it out of context. I don't know. So that kind of stuff, yeah, has always gone on. Yeah, it's certainly going to go on in social media too. Sure. Yeah.
How do you see Facebook's new policy on political campaigning? How do you think that will shape influence?
Are you talking about how they pulled the plug on the family, kind of the sharing?
I think so, yeah.
I think what she's talking about is Facebook just yesterday or the day before announced that something that really benefited the Obama folks in 2012, they're going to discontinue. And basically, what was it? It was an app that you could download that enabled campaigns to see who you were forwarding stuff to, and then they could match it up against their own voter lists. That's sort of it, right? They've discontinued that, so it's going to be harder, I think, for campaigns to find out exactly who you're sharing information with. But I think the broader move to Facebook is not going to be diminished all that much. It'll hurt the campaigns a little bit, but I think they'll figure a way around it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Hi.
What are some other brands in politics, political journalism, that you think are doing an interesting job, especially sort of the new ones? I guess PolitiFact is not that new, but it's relatively new. Or
I mean, news, I mean, well, I put BuzzFeed in. I think BuzzFeed is just phenomenal. And for anybody who thinks BuzzFeed is all about, you know, the cat, you know, the lists and the pictures of the, you know, the Labrador retrievers and all of that, they moved away from that a long time ago. BuzzFeed has journalists in about a dozen countries now. They've hired Pulitzer Prize winners to work for them. They're really doing some really interesting things. And talk about data mining and analytics. They do it better than anybody. They are really phenomenal. I think BuzzFeed is a really interesting company. Yeah. It's great. Oh, I can.
When you flashed the slide that showed that nobody trusts anybody anymore, and the source was the Gallup poll, and my colleague...
People don't even trust them.
Well, that's what my colleague in front of me said, Doug Cummings said, well, do we trust pollsters anymore? And in the recent Senate race here in Virginia, in fact, the polls were pretty far off.
Yeah, they really blew that.
Do you see any trend there that people either aren't answering the polls accurately, or the methodology is broken because of the way that Gallup is?
I think it may be the latter. I mean, they've been around since the 40s, I guess, in this whole landline polling. I mean, older people tend to have landlines. None of you have a landline, I'll bet. So the methodology is flawed. So that slide, to some extent, I think you could question the source, but nevertheless, other things I've seen, more or less.
I don't dispute the results.
We all know that the levels of trust are down, but what I do to get around that is I use, say, the Real Clear Politics average of polls. If you get on to Real Clear Politics, I think do a real good job of, they take the most recent 8 or 9 polls and they aggregate them, so it tends to smooth out the volatility in the data. And I think that's a much better way of doing it, because if you might be suspect of a Gallup poll, and there are people on the left who say, oh, well, that's a Fox News poll, that doesn't mean anything, and people on the right say, well, that's an MSNBC poll, I can't trust them. So what Real Clear Politics does, they take all the polls together, throw them into a blender and hit puree, and I think it's about as good as you can get, unless if you can figure out a way to build a better mousetrap, Pam, go for it.
I'll work on it.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. Yeah. Anything else?
I mean, that was my comment. I think deeper than that, it's when you have something as general as a poll question, are the results interesting compared to, the depth that an individual, an idea can have, for instance? I mean, is it really that interesting to just say people have lost faith in institutions, as opposed to a story that can be told, with individuals, or on a smaller scale, is what I'm saying, is that the larger scale that's required by polls loses a lot of distinctions. So I think that was my main point.
Well, that's a fair point. I mean, even the messenger, I think you have to question. But nevertheless, I've seen other studies that are pretty similar to that. So yeah, Gallup, I think people question them. They were, they're the same folks who said that Romney was going to, cruise in 2012. Well, that didn't quite work out. I mean, they get it wrong all the time. So it's not an exact science. It's just a poll is nothing but a data point in a very narrow point of time. It can change at any moment. So yeah. So anybody else? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.